nets. The last thing here is don't forget about your source net or load balancers. If you have an organization that's large enough that you have load balancers or source net, so source net for those that I'm trying to see if people know what I mean, like where an incoming packet, the source address gets changed when it comes into your infrastructure, that's source net. We're all familiar with destination netting, but that's source netting. And that people do have that. It is not interesting or useful when your web server shows all connections coming from your load balancer. If the log says they all came from 10.2.2.2, you're like, oh yeah, it's our load balancer. Of course they all came from your load balancer. So now you have to go back to the load balancer and say, does the load balancer have logs, and can you stitch them together with the web server logs? Because all you want to know is, where did that user log in from? That's all you want to know. And now you have to put two pieces of data together, and if they're not time synced, or if there's not a unique identifier between the two, it's difficult.
As someone with a lot of experience in this, if the web servers are Linux, you can use policy-based routing to route back packets that way, so you can avoid having to source net. On the Windows side, it becomes more difficult, but we tend to, on the load balancer, insert a source header into the calls themselves, and that gives us the logs.
Right.
But then, if we need to do the analysis, we can see like X header original source.
Right, and even better, hopefully the web server, you can put in a custom log to log those headers right on the web server, so you don't even have to look in two places. So I had a slide that, this used to be its own slide, and it said, avoid architectures that require source net, but I had to cut things, so I had too many slides, so it got cut. But thank you for saying avoid architectures that require this kind of stuff, please. So what stuff should we log? I don't need to go through all this. These are just some ideas that you can look at. If you have these things and you're not logging stuff from them, you probably should. They're kind of obvious. The thing I will say here is try to log in multiple places. Again, having something's better than nothing. If you're going to log in more places and one of them breaks and you don't notice it because you don't look at your logs every day, you have coverage now, because probably an attack is going to cross 2 or 3 pieces of infrastructure. If you lose one, you're going to have logs from the other 2, hopefully. It also gives you a lot more confidence in your conclusions when you say, yep, it happened here and I saw it here. A lot better than just it happened here and I don't have logs here. It's a better conclusion. It gives them a lot more confidence in your conclusion. So that's always nice to have. I mentioned these on a separate slide because I less often see logging here, and these are more interesting. If you have in-house developed applications, it's awesome if your developers have really good logging, transaction-based logging with sources and destinations and users and who did what. The thing that you'll have to know about that is you have to have somebody that can read those logs, because an outsider won't have any idea how your application works or what those log lines mean. So you would need access to those smart people. DNS logs are good. Most folks don't have them. What this can do is it allows you to figure out, well, who looked up this IP? 'Cause, again, depending on your infrastructure, you might say, one of our clients went out to this bad IP on the internet. Well, why? And if you have a web filter, you can find out. If you don't have a web filter, that becomes more difficult to find that out. Maybe you can find out what host it was, but now you're still not sure, because if that IP, suspicious IP, hosts like 400 websites, you don't know which one they went to. DNS log, among other technologies, but a DNS log being a pretty simple one, can show you pretty easily that the user mistyped Bob's Pizza and then immediately realized that he mistyped Bob's Pizza and typed it correctly the second time. And then you can explain, okay, why did they visit that website? It was a simple error, simple mistype. So that's that. So the Beaver always says more logs. So I think I've pushed this enough, right? More logs, more logs, more logs. Beavers love logs, so let's get them what they want. The last kind of log that we want more logs of is DHCP logs. A lot of folks have DHCP in their environment, right? But they don't have a log that shows at what time what MAC address was using a certain IP. And I'll tell you, the ISPs have that because that's what they have to give to law enforcement when they subpoena them all the time. So in your own environment, it's important to have that. That's how you tie activity back to an actual machine or a user. Without that, you're guessing. So that's really important to have. And what the Beaver wants, basically, is he wants you to make log enabling and testing part of your normal build process. So if you have a build process that says when we put in a server, we do A, B, C, D, E, F should be ensure that logging is working, and on our syslog server, we're receiving the logs and that all the fields are there. And in your operational processes, part of the things you check, like, is web server up? Yes. The second check is, are logs being sent to where they're supposed to be sent? Just what I like to say is just operationalize this. It's not a security function to keep logs. It's an operational function to keep logs. It should be everybody's responsibility that owns systems to keep logs. It's not security's problem. Security just happens to be one of the big consumers of logs. So the Holy Grail, wouldn't it be nice to just log all conversations on your network at all times? Just log, like everything everywhere just gets written to a huge SAN because you pay a lot of money for this big SAN. You got to put some stuff on it. You're going to just log everything forever so that when you have an incident, you can just look back. It sounds crazy. I argue that it is not crazy, and Cisco calls it NetFlow. Cisco calls it NetFlow. Now it's kind of, a lot of people use it vendor agnostically. IPFix or JFlow are some other vendor terms for this. Of course, I have overstated its capabilities. It does not log the content of packets. That would be insane. But what it does do is it says at this time, this host with this source port talk to this host on this destination port for this many bytes or this many packets. That is super, super useful. If you can have that throughout your environment and keep that for a month, your incident handling is going to go like fast if you have good data in NetFlow. It's really, really valuable. I can't overstate it enough. Calling it maybe the Holy Grail is too much, but really like NetFlow. When we do a gig and they have NetFlow, it makes things go so much better, provided that they're collecting it and keeping it. You know, again, they may have turned off the collector yesterday or whatever. So I've now talked, it's now like I'm a half hour into this thing and I've talked about logs. And so that's really, I'm glad you guys spent like that much time sitting in here saying, turn on your logs. But it's the most important, it is the most important preparation step for incident response. That's why I spent the first half hour on it. But enough about it. The last thing, maybe second to last thing I'll say about it. No, it's the last thing. Is time sync. Logs are very difficult to use to build a timeline when the times are all wrong. So I'm like, yeah, I know, it sucks. Everybody's like, it's terrible. So a good incident responder, when they gather logs, will check the time on the source where the logs came from if they're not familiar that those servers are synced. And if it's off by 10 minutes, you can adjust the logs to be 10 minutes different. Hopefully not having to do that in your head. You can actually put it into like an Excel if you're doing analysis in Excel. But it sucks to have to do that. And if you forget to check that they're off and you're trying to stitch together events from 3 or 4 different logs, it is so hard to do that. Secondly, I don't know how people operate IT that isn't time synced, like not even security. And we see it. It is not uncommon for people to have bad time on half of their devices. It's incredible. The other thing, of course, is what time zone it is. If you are a huge multinational and you have server systems all across the world with some kind of central repository, you should probably just log everything in UTC. There's no such thing as a local time zone for a company like that. If you're small, it would confuse everybody at your like 4-person company if you logged in UTC. So you probably keep it in the local time zone. But you have to know that and have some kind of an approach for that. Or at very least, in all the logs, have to have an offset in them so that you know the time zone. Because you might be trying to correlate events across time zones. And again, so the time element of logs is super, super important. By the way, you don't need a special GPS receiver and thousands of dollars worth of equipment to have time sync. Just use NTP from the internet. It's good enough. So I'm not telling you to spend, this isn't that hard, is what I'm trying to say. Of course, I am not a lawyer, so I'm not qualified to talk about any of this, but I'm going to anyway. These are some of my opinion. If you're going to only focus on like a few legally things, these are the things to focus on. Have authority to monitor your network. That seems obvious. Have authority to ask questions of users. I'll talk about that. Authority to inspect or seize things. That seems easy, except when it's a third party doing work for you. It's unclear how much rights you have to their hardware. And to have an AUP, an acceptable use policy. Authority to monitor, it seems pretty straightforward. Authority to ask questions of users, I want to focus on for a second. It is my opinion that a mature incident response organization, if you have some incident responders, should have the power to call up users and just ask simple questions. And they probably don't want to do that when someone's being targeted or when you think this person did bad things inside your organization because you don't want to tip them off. I get that. But it should be the discretion of the incident responder to just call up and say, did you visit a website like this yesterday? And oh yeah, it was crazy. I was looking for like the pizza place on my way home and by mistake I went to the wrong thing. Done. And if the evidence in your web filter log supports that, you're through, incident done. File it away. If you don't make that phone call, you have to draw conclusions from other systems. Maybe you have to do forensics and spend a bunch of money and effort to come to that conclusion. That was not worthwhile. So I argue there are some HR departments that don't like this. They want their IT security not to interact with people. I think it's fine to interact with them. The other thing is, if there's an incident where you have like the host has been botted or you think that somebody's targeting you guys, your company, and there was a particular user that may have opened a PDF to infect themselves, it's good to just ask them, oh, where did you get that from? Oh, it was my Gmail, my personal mail. I was reading my personal mail. Well, so that's a good thing to know because now you know that either it wasn't targeted Or if it was, the people who are targeting you know this person's personal email. So that's a different kind of a thing to build from an incident. Interviewing people like that can be really valuable in incident response, I think. So have an AUP. There's at least one case that I've heard of where a user was doing something in their personal, on company equipment, company network, but using their personal email, their web-based Yahoo Mail or something. And they got fired for the content of those emails. And that person then claimed that the company had no right to monitor that. She had an expectation of privacy in those mails because it was her personal email. And the court agreed with her. And the court agreed because she wasn't told that she had no expectation of privacy in her personal email. So I have some language in the speaker notes to this if you download the presentation later. It goes like this. This is a sample AUP. All use and content of companies' computer systems or networks may be monitored. That seems pretty simple. Everybody's AUP has that in it, I'm sure. The next sentence, users should have no expectation of privacy in their use of companies' systems or networks. Again, we're telling them specifically you have no expectation of privacy, comma, including in personal use thereof. So now you have explicitly said, because most companies allow some personal use, we're going to allow you to do personal things, but you have no expectation of privacy in it. We have full rights to monitor your personal stuff. That's going to avoid that bad situation where somebody says, I didn't know you were monitoring, and the court agrees with them. The other thing that AUPs are good for is this whole third-party thing and bring your own device. So if you're bringing your own laptop to work, or your own iPad or whatever, have you sign something or has the company forced you to sign something that says they have the right to seize that from you? Some places that are mature have that. Some places that are immature don't. And so it becomes a very uncomfortable situation. You're like, no, it's mine. I'm not going to let you look at it. So you want to have those things taken care of. There is one more legality that's very icky that we have to talk about, and it's this. In what industry do we let this guy do stuff and not let that guy do stuff? Unfortunately, and for those of you that don't know what PI stands for there, nowadays it stands for professional investigator. It used to stand for private investigator or private eye, like Magnum PI. That's what PI means. Nowadays they just have professionalized the term. It's called a professional investigator. In Michigan, and in a number of other states, but not all states, there was a move afoot that said people doing computer forensics are not licensed currently, because they weren't, and they should be. And so, starting in 2008 in Michigan, a PI license is required to perform computer forensics to be used as evidence before a court, board, officer, or investigating committee. That's what the law says. These links are in here so you can look at them later. I realize they're too small to read. Computer forensics, that's its definition. If I read it to you, I'm just going to be reading when you're reading. So I'll just give you 10 seconds to read that. So you should all be frightened now of this law. These two are links to a talk by a guy named Scott Moulton, who runs a data recovery and forensics business in Georgia. He got caught when Georgia's law went on the books, and he found out about it when he was on the stand testifying about the forensics that he illegally just did.
Doesn't that only pertain if you're an outside?
Yes, I have the next slide. So, sorry. But yes, there are exemptions. This is the most important one. Employees doing internal-only work. So if you're an employee of a company and you're doing forensics for that company internally only, you don't have to be licensed. The whole idea of licensure is if you're putting services out there, right? And also there's exemptions for law enforcement, for attorneys, for CPAs, et cetera.
Do you know for a company that does do servicing, if only the owner of the company needs their PI license?
So,
does everyone investigating or doing, performing services need to have the PI license?
I don't know the answer to that. I've tried to figure that out. Maybe Larry does.
From my understanding of the law and how it works with me and my company, my manager has a PI license. Since I work underneath him, I'm covered. Okay.
So consult your attorney about that. I've heard that, and I've heard the opposite. You're probably right. I mean, given the maturity of your...
Yeah, in Michigan, at least.
Right.
What about contractors working
So, right.
on site at a vendor?
Here's my note. Note there does not seem to be an exemption for service providers. This says an employee reimbursed on a salary basis. So if you're doing forensics for a company and you are an employee of that company, you're okay. If you're a contractor of that company, you're not an employee. If you're a service provider hired to do IT and you're doing forensics for them, you are doing a service. All right,
Just saying.
right.
We brought that to him and he said that it doesn't apply to him.
So to be clear, incident response is not the same as forensics. I'm not claiming that it is. What I'm saying is you have to be cognizant of this and cognizant of where that line is. That's what I'm saying. So that's it. I'm going to stop. This is a really icky topic. I don't like to talk about it, but I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I don't include this in here. The last thing I will say is practicing forensics without a license in the state of Michigan is a felony. Plus, they'll throw out all your evidence. I mean, that's the actual risk. You go to testify, they're going to say, no, it wasn't licensed. Evidence no good, case dismissed. And you just committed a felony. So, okay.
Thanks for providing us the evidence for your case.
Yeah. I don't do forensics in the state of Michigan because it would require a license. So incident response policy and process, who makes what decisions? These are if you're not going to write a full incident response policy and process, never going to get around to it. These are like the 4 things, to look at. Who makes what decisions? Who needs to be involved? How and when to involve law enforcement, and what scenarios have legal implications. The last thing, is this. So when are you going to have to do a breach notification? Depending on your industry, what kind of data you have, that's something that if you have PII, you're going to want to know and think about a little bit ahead of time when you're going to have to do breach notifications. Who makes what decisions and who needs to be involved is important so that your management doesn't start clashing and yelling at each other when they're having a bad incident. So you want to try and work out some of that. Documentation is important to have. Network diagrams and stuff, an inventory of systems. Credentials, like to be able to actually log into systems, is important. Especially this. Assume at least one key IT person is not going to be there. That happens a lot. If you just think of your own organization, how often are people on vacation or they're unavailable? And if an incident happens then, and that's your networking guru, and your incident responder says, I need a span port to mirror traffic between these 2 things, please tell me where to plug in. And you go, oh, the network guy's not here. That's not a very good, that's an answer, but it's not a very good one. So you should be able to handle stuff like that. Have your documentation and credentials. And if the incident is your file server's down, where you have all your documentation, it's going to be hard to get to it. So some more documentation to have external contact lists, service providers, et cetera, circuit numbers. Someone wanted me to say circuit numbers. If you ever call your ISP and you don't know your circuit number, they'll probably hang up on you. Internal contact lists are good to have. You need to know how to get a hold of people in HR. If you have remote sites where people do hands-on work for you now because you don't have an IT person there and they need to plug something in, you need to know who those people are. What I'll say about contact lists is if your company has a disaster recovery process, just use that. So a good disaster recovery process has like a printed sheet you can put in your wallet with everybody's like cell phone numbers or whatever, because when the VoIP system at work goes down because it was part of the incident, you can't use your internal phone system anymore, so you're going to look up people's cell phone numbers on your little sheet. So if your DR process has one of those, use that. That is also your incident response contact list. You don't need to rebuild it. So this is the second to last recommendation. Sufficient DHCP pools. I've not seen this mentioned before, which is why I wanted to include it. I said earlier you should have DHCP logs so that you can tie a MAC address to an IP at a certain time. That's important. But if you just make your DHCP pools big enough so that you're not rotating addresses all the time on hosts, man, does that help. You can use the log later to make sure that you've got the right host, but when you're trying to hunt down a host, if your IP addresses are changing all the time, and by all the time I mean every few minutes, it makes tracking down that host really, really difficult, and you're going to waste a lot of time and resources. You guys are all thinking this is insane. Who would do this? I just did a gig at a place whose wired network DHCP lease time was 2 minutes. Yeah, they were really short of addresses, and that was their solution. And DHCP servers tend to try and provide the same address. Theirs didn't. I don't know why. Like, I don't know what technology they were using, but it was impossible to track hosts now. The other thing is they were trying to rely on the host name being registered in DNS of the current host. It didn't work, and I've never seen it work on an incident where you try and track down, well, what host is this based on the host name that's in DNS right now in reverse DNS? Half the time it's wrong. And again, I don't know why that is. If it's just often implemented incorrectly or it's unreliable, I don't know. So you want to be able to get to the MAC address, and then the last thing there is once you have the MAC address, can you track it back? Do you have something that ties that to a user so that you can go to that person and beat them about the head or whatever you need to do, or seize the computer or whatever? Don't use a bat on the wrong person. Make sure you've got the actual right person. So the last incident response preparation thing is practice. in my opinion. Practicing is really, really valuable. This can be a tabletop 5-minute practice in your own head. This can be, oh, I've built a server, let me look at the logs and think about what I might use these logs for practice. If you're handling a lot of incidents and you have a mature incident response process already, you probably don't need to practice. I mean, if you're a full-time incident responder and this is what you do all day, you don't really need to practice. If there's a type of incident you're worried about that you don't handle all the time, maybe you need to practice that. What practice is going to uncover is where you're missing things. So if your practice is a scenario or an actual incident, you're going to run through it and realize, oops, we don't have logging over here, and so you're going to have some feedback to the IT ops to get logging fixed over there. So that's why I think practice is really important. And that's why we're going to do some practice. So here's the scenario. So that could be a concern, and this gets to you and you're the security person, and they say somebody's reading my email. And you have Exchange server inside, people using Outlook clients, and you've also exposed Outlook web access to the internet, like everyone does. So where do you look first? These are Gurkhan balls that they gave to me, and I'll be throwing them at correct answers. Where do you look first? Where would you look first?
User's password age, just to make sure it wasn't a simple shoulder serve.
Could be. That is not where I would look first, though. Anybody else want to?
IS logs on the Exchange server.
IS logs. Are you looking for OA access? So that's what I'm going for. It might actually be wrong. I said at the beginning of this presentation I might be wrong. So my answer in my world is I'm going to talk to the user and try and figure out what's going on, but I'm going to look in the OA logs. OA, most people expose it to the internet with just a username and password. So you were right about the password part. So if you want to read somebody's email, just guess their password and read their email via OA. That's the easiest way. And so to me, that's where you go and look for something like this. So in my simple world, let's say we go look there and we find that someone has actually logged into their email from OA, and we say to the user, do you use Outlook web access? And they say, what? I just read my email on my laptop. I don't know if Outlook works. So now you know that they don't use OA, but someone logged into it. And you find the source IP from where that login came. What is, so I'm going to ask the question differently. What would I do with that source IP next? What's the next thing that you or I might do with that source IP now that we have the source? Compare it with the MAC address. So I think you've gone a couple steps too far. We're on the internet, so we can't get the MAC address. Sorry. To be clear, this is an external attack. So okay, so who owns the source IP is a good answer, but it's not the one I'm looking for because it's too easy. Geolocation is also too easy. So you have your own logs, and you have a source IP that logged into one user's account. What now are you going to look for based on that source IP? Yes. I'm too far to throw, so pass that back. So what you want to do now, so this is getting into a little bit of how to do IR, but if you get that IP, I mean, you're going to do a geolocation on it, find out where it is. That is correct answer. But what you want to do now is, okay, what you're trying to do is scope the incident. Is this attacking IP reading this one user's email or everybody's email? So if you then search your logs based on that IP, you're going to find out, oh, they're only reading Bob's mail, or oh, they're reading 10 people's mail. Reading 10 people's mail is a very different incident than reading Bob's mail, because Bob's mail is probably his wife that's reading his email. If it's 10 people's email, somebody's going after your company, right? So that is a very, very different scenario. And by the way, that sort of thing, if it's focused on one user and they think they're being spied on, the spouse is like the cause half the time. So just keep that in your, that's not a joke. Everybody thinks their company is being attacked. It's not actually their company. So here's another practice. Next one. So this user thinks, oh, something happened and then it went away and it wasn't being remote controlled anymore. So my question is a very specific question. How can NetFlow help you? This is an internal PC on your internal network. How can NetFlow help you with this? What are you going to look for if you have NetFlow? Dave Kennedy's IP. Inbound connections to it. That is pretty much the answer. You got to look for outbound as well because it could be an outbound remote controlled thing, but inbound's what I'm going for. And so what if you do see an inbound connection to destination port 5900? Who knows what 5900? VNC. That's a remote control tool. So this makes sense now, right? Okay, user says their machine was remote controlled for a few seconds and then it stopped. And NetFlow shows us there was a VNC connection to it. See how easy NetFlow makes this incident response thing in my little world? So now you're going to look for the source IP. So here's some scenarios to run through. That source IP is a remote site on their wireless network. It's your site, it's your wireless network, but it's like in another state. Do you have sufficient logging and data to tie that back to a user so that you know who that was, so you know who to go hit with a bat? Another one might be, it comes back to your VPN pool. Do you have VPN logs to show who was using that address at that time from wherever on the internet? So, but let's say that it actually, and this is like, you know, you'd bet 20 bucks that this is what it's going to be. Turns out your IT people use VNC legitimately, and they connected to the wrong machine. And so you find out what IT person it was, and you call them. Again, the importance of being able to just call people to dispel these incidents quickly and go, hey, IT guy, Bob reports that somebody remote controlled his machine, and NetFlow tells me it was you, like an hour ago. What's up with that? And, oh, it was crazy, man. I was, like, not paying attention, and I had so many phone calls. I didn't know what was going on. Jane called, and I had to, like, remote control her machine to fix something, and I typed the wrong IP. Once I realized I was on the wrong machine, I stopped and then went and fixed Jane's issue. Done. Your incident is now done. Okay. The other way to do that is to be insane and do full host forensics on that system because you think it's been botted because the Chinese are after you. And you spend a lot of money and a lot of time to realize that it was a VNC connection from your IT guy. So that's why NetFlow is awesome. So here's the next one. User calls the help desk. Oh my God, I've been hacked. I don't know why she's so happy about having been hacked, but she is so she is so smiley that she got hacked. She's so happy about it. So a user reports. I'll let you read it. I don't like to read things to you. You can read it. This is based on a true story from a long time ago, though. So okay, you're gonna have to be quiet now because I'm gonna ruin the surprise. So the local IT person goes there and confirms, like, yep, things are actually being typed in the keyboard buffer because whatever application we switch to, that's where the stuff is being typed. And it's not random letters, it's words. It's just that the sentences don't make any sense. It's like random words being typed in. So this is really weird. So they're kind of standing around and we're on the phone, like watching it. And unfortunately, the word president and the word kill both appear in the same paragraph, not next to each other, in the same paragraph of gibberish, like random words. So the local management who is now involved and freaking out says, oh my God, hackers are in our machine, in our internal network, typing threats to the president. Let's call the Secret Service. And let me tell you, if you call the Secret Service and tell them that, they will come. They will come. And they will take all your stuff. Look, before the Secret Service got there, we figured it out, and you were very close. Does anybody else have any ideas what benign cause this could possibly be?
We had this, and it was dragon.
Speech to text.
And the word was bomb.
Bomb. Okay, so isn't this funny?
The FBI.
Right, FBI. So we have almost the same story. Law enforcement getting called because someone had speech to text turned on, and the microphone was open. Probably nobody even said bomb or president or whatever. Ambient noise and ambient words, you know how well speech to text works. It picks up anything and makes words out of it. That's what it was. I don't know who figured it out. We weren't there looking at it, but someone like, can you look in your system tray and see if there's like a little microphone icon? Oh, there is. Oh. So that did not stop the Secret Service from seizing that machine. They seized it anyway. But anyway, that was a funny incident that I thought I might tell you about. I can't resist having a slide about incident response advice, even though I told you this wasn't the talk. Have somebody in charge. Don't freak out. Don't let your management freak out, and don't go too fast. Firefighters follow this when they respond to a fire. They don't freak out. Somebody's in charge. They don't go too fast. And so these are kind of, I mean, if there is a non-technical incident responders guide, that's it, in my opinion. Be flexible. One of my colleagues recommended a small cache of hardware. If you're a big company, this could mean like a whole rack full of servers, if you're really big. If you're small, this could mean an old laptop. But a lot of times you want to say like, oh, we need to gather this data. Can we do this real quick? And if you have a spare piece of hardware, you saved yourself 4 hours. So that's really nice to have. Be flexible. You will go down paths with incident response for a day and have to abandon it because you run out of data. And so you just have to not like get too sad about that and be flexible and change paths. I'm not going to talk about that. It takes too long. I'm running out of time. So what I would like to do is at the beginning of the thing, of my talk, I said, if you had a bad incident, try and remember something that you wish you would have done to make it go better. Does anybody have one I didn't cover? So I covered like every possible bad thing. Yes?
The dragon incident they made too many assumptions on what the field tech would do. And the field tech went in and tried to install log capture software on the
Right. So if you are going to do host-based forensics, if you think that an incident is leading that way, or you guys just like to do it a lot, or it's part of your process, you probably don't want to mess with the host too much, right? I try and touch a host a little bit because you want to rely on the network stuff, and you don't want to do the forensics because you have to hire a properly licensed person, at least in this state, to do that anyway. And it costs a lot of money. So, right, especially if you think there are legal implications to this event, you probably don't want to mess with the host too much. So that's a good one.
I would say it's occasionally useful to have physical eyes on the box. We had a typing incident. Turns out it was a USB prank device that would just randomly respond to people when they were typing.
Yeah, so it is easier to manage an incident if you're there physically. I think everybody gets that. It's easier to do anything if you're there physically. But you can literally look at the machine and see if there's a lot of hard drive activity. If the hard drive is going like crazy when nothing's happening, well, maybe there is a bot on there rather than speech to text is turned on. So those sort of things can be valuable. Anything else? I'm pretty much out of time.
How would you do that now with the recent processors and, well, the last 10 years? These processors are so powerful, even if you take a 1%, 2% out of the process, you hardly could notice any changes.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not a good indicator. I'm just saying there are things when you're physically there where you can get a better feeling for things. At least I think there are. Was that your question? Like, how can you tell? I mean, who doesn't have a Windows machine whose disk churns incessantly when something is running? Right? I hear my wife's Windows machine, she's not even at it. And it's like, na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. I'm like, what is it doing over there? It's probably like an antivirus update. So you can almost draw a conclusion. I don't really know what it's doing, but I can guess that something's being updated on that machine right now. So that's the kind of conclusion I really was talking about. You can't draw for sure conclusions about it.
Can you speak to some of the problems that you have when doing like full packet captures? You said you usually just go for NetFlow.
So, by the way, the next speaker needs to bump me off. Are they here?
That's me.
Because we're running out of time. Oh, okay. I'm trying to be sensitive to your time. So if I were to do an incident response and they have NetFlow, I'm going to try and use that data or any other log data they have to figure out what's going on. If you start to narrow on something and you want to actually find out who's talking about what, I would try and get a packet capture. Depending on the customer and the organization, I might just say, can you just give me a mirror report, please, and leave me alone? And I'll do it on my own laptop. If it's at a remote site, obviously that's not possible. So then we would need something locally to do it. And the reason I say this is there's going to be a network device in the path where you could probably do that and then pull that capture back. But I find that most people aren't really good at doing that, or they don't know how to do it, or they're going to mess things up. And then the data, it'll take them 4 hours to give me a capture that's wrong anyway. I've had that where they can't even write a filter correctly. So I tend, again, it depends on the organization. If it's a pretty mature organization and they're willing to give me some of their time, I'm an outsider, so sometimes they don't even want to spend time with me. They just say, go fix it. I'm like, well, it's your network. I don't even have credentials. I need somebody to sit with me. An internal person might have a different experience, but it totally depends on the people involved and the technology involved. I have no problem doing captures on my own if I can get the data. But if it's a firewall and it's 200 miles away, and if I can convince them to figure out how to do a capture on it, awesome. I'll do that too. Did that address your question? Or? I'm for every piece of data you can get. Yeah, I mean, NetFlow is so good because it's relatively light for the amount of value it gives you, in my opinion. Because it's not capturing the content, you're getting a lot of value out of a small amount of data. All right, it's time for you to kick me off. Thanks very much.